It's practically decided that Shohei will win MVP. Not a prediction. Not a hope. Not a calculated opinion built on early season statistics. A declaration. So who said it? What have they seen in Ohtani this season that pushed them to speak with that kind of certainty? And what does Ohtani's 2025 performance actually look like when you strip away the highlight reels and examine it with the same eye a legend uses? Let's go deeper than the numbers. Because what is happening right now in baseball is not a story that statistics alone can tell. Every season, the MVP conversation starts the same way. Names get thrown around. Early numbers get cited. Arguments get made about which player is most valuable in which context, which team needs their star the most, which performance is most impressive given the circumstances. This season, that conversation lasted approximately 2 weeks before it quietly dissolved. Not because people stopped caring. Not because the award stopped mattering. Because Shohei Ohtani made the argument unnecessary. What he has produced in 2025 has not simply been impressive by the standard of modern baseball players. It has been impressive by the standard of Shohei Ohtani, a player who has already compressed more historic achievements into a single career than most players accumulate across generations. At the plate, he has been operating at a level that makes opposing pitching staffs look like they are solving a problem they don't have the tools for. His ability to identify a pitch, track its movement, and make contact decisions within fractions of a second has always been elite. But something about 2025 feels different. More refined. More intentional. Like a version of Ohtani who has taken everything he already knew and compressed it into something sharper and more dangerous. His power numbers have been extraordinary. His on-base percentage reflects not just skill but a deeper understanding of how to use patience as a weapon. His stolen base numbers continue to redefine what a player of his physical profile should theoretically be capable of doing on the base paths. And his pitching, the side of his game that the world watched anxiously through his recovery, has returned with something to prove. When a legend looked at all of this and said the MVP was practically decided, they weren't speaking casually. They were reading the same evidence the rest of baseball has been quietly processing for weeks. In sports, admiration flows in one direction most of the time. Fans admire players. Young players admire veterans. Veterans admire legends. And legends, the true ones, the names carved into the permanent record of a sport, rarely look up. Because there is rarely someone above them to look toward. The legend who spoke about Ohtani this season understands this dynamic personally. Their career placed them at a height where admiration from the outside was constant and expected. Where younger players studied their mechanics. Where analysts broke down their approach. Where fans debated their place in history with the kind of passion usually reserved for philosophical arguments. To reach that level and then genuinely feel admiration for someone else, not performed admiration, not strategic compliments designed for a media moment, but real, unfiltered recognition, requires encountering something that genuinely exceeds your own framework for what is possible. That is what Ohtani has done to this legend. Their words were not delivered in the language of hype. They were delivered in the language of someone who has personally experienced the discipline, the sacrifice, the daily grind of maintaining excellence at the highest level, and who recognizes that Ohtani is doing all of that while simultaneously operating in two completely separate domains of the sport. When they said, practically decided, they were not being generous. They were being accurate. And people who have spent decades earning the right to judge greatness don't confuse those two things. The phrase in the title is worth examining carefully. Day by day. Not season by season. Not career milestone by career milestone. Day by day. Because that is the actual rhythm of what Ohtani is doing in 2025. The unprecedented feats are not arriving in dramatic, widely spaced moments separated by months of ordinary performance. They are arriving with a consistency that has started to feel almost routine, which is itself one of the most remarkable things about this season. Consider what routine means for most elite athletes. Routine means performing at their established level. Maintaining the standard they have already set. Producing results that match their career averages and meet the expectations their previous seasons have created. For Ohtani in 2025, routine means adding to a historical record that was already unlike anything the sport had seen. Every time he steps to the plate against a pitcher who has specifically prepared to neutralize his strengths, he finds a different answer. Every time analysts identify a pattern in his approach, he adjusts before that pattern can become a reliable strategy against him. Every time the baseball world thinks it has found the ceiling of what he can do, the ceiling moves. Day by day. At-bat by at-bat. Inning by inning. The legend who spoke about him this season has watched enough baseball to know what genuine, sustained greatness looks like versus what inflated statistics in a weak context look like. And what they see in Ohtani's daily performance is the former, stripped of any favorable context, standing on its own merit, demanding recognition on its own terms. To understand why 2025 feels different, why even legends are speaking in terms of things being practically decided, you have to understand what Ohtani has done to prepare his body for this specific moment. The surgery. The rehabilitation. The long months of watching his teammates compete while he worked in the background, rebuilding something that the baseball world wasn't sure would ever return to its previous level. Athletes who return from major surgical procedures face a psychological challenge that is almost impossible to fully explain to someone who hasn't experienced it. The body heals on a timeline that the mind refuses to accept. There are days when progress is invisible. Days when the gap between where you are and where you need to be feels permanent rather than temporary. Days when the discipline that carried you to greatness in the first place is the only thing keeping you functional. Ohtani went through all of that. Quietly. With the same methodical approach he brings to everything else in his life. His diet through rehabilitation was as carefully managed as it had ever been. His physical therapy was treated with the same seriousness as game preparation. The people around him during that period have described a focus that was almost difficult to be around, not because it was unpleasant, but because it was so complete, so total, that it made ordinary human behavior seem inadequate by comparison. And when he came back, when the pitching arm returned to full readiness and the two-way experiment resumed with a healthy, recovered, fully rebuilt Shohei Ohtani, what emerged was not a cautious version trying to ease back into greatness. What emerged was 2025. The legend sees this. They understand that what they are watching is not just talent expressing itself. It is the product of a process that most people cannot sustain even when they are completely healthy, let alone through the kind of setback Ohtani navigated. That is why the admiration is genuine. That is why the declaration carries weight. Here is the question that every serious baseball conversation eventually arrives at. The one that sits underneath all the statistics and the highlight clips and the award predictions. What actually separates Ohtani from the other great players of his era? Because the era he is playing in is not weak. The competition around him is genuinely excellent. There are players in this generation of baseball who, in any other era, would be considered the defining talent of their time. Players with historic contracts, historic numbers, historic reputations built on a foundation of real excellence. And Ohtani is so far beyond the conversation that a legend recently declared his MVP award practically decided before the season is even close to finished. The separation isn't just physical. It isn't just his ability to throw and hit at levels that shouldn't coexist in one human body. Those things are real and they matter, but they have been documented and analyzed and celebrated extensively enough that they no longer fully explain the gap. The separation is in the approach. Ohtani treats every single day as a problem to be solved with maximum available effort and intelligence. He doesn't have off days philosophically. He doesn't arrive at the ballpark with anything less than complete readiness to execute the preparation he has built his entire professional life around. Other great players are great at baseball. Ohtani is great at becoming, continuously, relentlessly, day by day, the best possible version of himself as a baseball player. And because he never stops that process, the ceiling of what he can achieve keeps moving in a direction that makes previous assessments of his limits look naive. The legend who admires him understands this distinction at a personal level. Because reaching legendary status yourself requires exactly that kind of relationship with your own development. And recognizing it in someone else, especially at a scale you haven't personally witnessed before, produces the kind of genuine admiration that doesn't need to be performed for cameras. It just comes out. Simply. Directly. Practically decided. Let's be specific. Because admiration without evidence is just sentiment, and Ohtani's 2025 season deserves more than sentiment. His batting numbers this season sit in a category that only a handful of players in the entire history of the sport have reached at this point in a season. His home run pace, if maintained, would put him in conversation with the greatest power-hitting seasons ever recorded. His slugging percentage reflects not just power but efficiency. He is not accumulating these numbers through volume alone, but through quality of contact that opposing pitchers have been unable to consistently prevent. His on-base numbers tell a story about patience and pitch recognition that is almost as impressive as the power. He is not simply swinging hard and making contact. He is making decisions at the plate that reflect a complete, sophisticated understanding of how pitchers are trying to navigate around his strengths, and then punishing them anyway. On the mound, his velocity has returned. His secondary pitches are sharp. His command, which was always the underappreciated component of his pitching excellence, has been precise in a way that gives his power pitches their full effectiveness. And then there is the combination, the simple, staggering fact that he is doing all of this simultaneously. That the pitcher who takes the mound every 5 days is the same person who leads the offensive lineup the other 4. That the at-bats he takes as a hitter are not a separate career from his pitching, they are the same career, happening in the same body, sustained by the same daily discipline. No historical comparison captures it fully. Because no historical player created the comparison point. The legend knows this. And that knowledge is exactly why their admiration sounds less like praise and more like witnessing. When a player of legendary standing speaks about Ohtani with the kind of certainty that bypasses prediction and lands directly on declaration, they are communicating something beyond the MVP race. They are asking the people listening to slow down. To stop consuming Ohtani's highlights as content and start recognizing them as history. Because history has a way of being invisible while it is happening. The moments that future generations will study and argue about and point to as the standard of what was possible, those moments are occurring right now, in real time, in stadiums where people are watching on their phones while simultaneously checking other scores. The legend is saying, stop. Look. Understand what you are watching. This is not a great player having a great season. This is a generational talent who has already redefined the boundaries of what one person can do in this sport, continuing to push those boundaries further on a daily basis, in a season where his own previous standard of greatness has somehow become the floor rather than the ceiling. The MVP is practically decided not because the competition is weak. It is practically decided because Shohei Ohtani in 2025 is producing at a level that makes the competition beside the point. And the legend who said so has earned every word of that assessment through a career that placed them among the greatest who ever played. When that person looks at Ohtani and feels admiration, genuine, unguarded, freely given admiration, the baseball world should understand exactly what that means. The hardest question to answer about Shohei Ohtani is not what he has done. The record speaks for itself with a clarity that requires no interpretation. The hardest question is what comes next. Because unprecedented, by definition, has no roadmap. There is no established path for what happens after you have already done things no one else has done. There is no template for how you continue pushing boundaries that you yourself created. Ohtani's answer to this question, based on everything his career has shown and everything the 2025 season is demonstrating, appears to be simple. You go back to the process. You return to the daily discipline. You eat what your body needs, train the way your goals demand, prepare with the thoroughness that excellence requires, and then you show up and compete with everything that preparation has built. Day by day. At-bat by at-bat. Start by start. The legend sees this. And in seeing it, they have done something that legends rarely do. They have looked at someone still actively playing and said, without hesitation, without qualification, without the careful hedging that experienced people usually apply to predictions about uncertain things. It's practically decided. That sentence will age well. Not because the season is over, but because the man it describes treats every single day like the MVP is still something he has to earn. And that, more than any statistic, is why it's already his.